Welcome to Beyond the Megawatt. I'm Mara.
I'm Valerie.
And today we have two special guests with us, Lillian and Jim. We want to talk about design to handover, closing the gap in commissioning, workforce, future ops. We're going to throw in some other topics that are relevant to this group. But why don't we start with quick intros? Kind of give us your backstory, Lillian,
Sure.
how you entered into the mission critical space.
Sure. So I actually fell into this industry just like many others. I think just about everyone that's in this industry just kind of fell into it. I was really lucky. I had my sister-in-law. She had a relationship with someone from EYP. Her mother was the EA for Steve Einhorn. And I came into the company EYP, and I started out as just receptionist, actually, believe it or not. And then I went into the specifications group, and then I got together with Rick Einhorn, and he was giving me some pointers on marketing, and kind of fell into that and moved to DC, and then worked at EYP still. And I did some marketing. I did just whatever was around for me to do, because it was kind of like one of those offices that just you did everything. So I got to learn a whole lot about the industry, and I was very, just kind of like one of those jack of all trades. But then I really focused on marketing. And about 3 years in the DC office, PI called me and asked me if I was interested, primary integration, and asked me if I was interested in a position. And anyways, I ended up going and doing marketing and got really involved with 7x24. And I think that's really where I was able to shine. Mm-hmm. I was able to put myself out there, something that I've never done. I was always behind the scenes. So I think 7x24 really got me out there and got me to, just meet people and go to events. And, so I'm really grateful for that. And that's pretty much how I started in the industry, and I'm here.
I love it. I've heard people say before, 7x24 and these groups give you a sense of belonging to something a little bit bigger than you, and it gives you exposure to other companies and technologies that we're not always privy to because we kind of work in our little box of commissioning. So that's great.
And I think it helped me build my network, right? So I feel like this is like my family.
Yeah.
This industry is personal to me. It's not just my job. It's what I do. We talked a little bit earlier about hobbies. And I was like, what are my hobbies? My hobbies are serving, right? And it's really because of the industry. So,
I love it.
Yeah.
Good. And Jim?
Yeah, I studied engineering at a school in New York called SUNY Maritime. And it was a very hands-on education. Like every summer we'd go out on a ship and put into practice all the stuff we learned. So I've been very involved in hands-on operations and testing and that sort of thing. And then when I graduated, I took a job at a utility company in New York. I worked there for about 6 years. And then I got a job at Cisco Hennessy back in the mid-90s. And then in the first .com boom, I started getting into commissioning at Cisco. I worked with a gentleman named Terry Gillick at Cisco Hennessy, and he was one of the guys at primary integration. And that's he brought me over there at some point, and that's where I met Lillian. And then worked at PI for until 2018. And then I left. I joined a small engineering firm for a couple of years, and then I went out on my own. And then about a year and a half ago, Lily and I bumped into each other, got to talking, and then we started a new venture.
I love it. Well, that's why Lillian and I are good friends, and I've kind of watched your career unfold. And why don't you talk a little bit about, because you are just now launching 21st Century Ops, which is exciting, and I love the logo, right? But maybe talk a little bit about the why. I mean, obviously you guys built a relationship. You knew each other in the past. You obviously trust each other. You saw something in the market that it was lacking and it needed. So talk a little bit about why you guys came together, why now, and a little bit about behind.
Right. Okay. So obviously I'm not technical, and Jim is. And Jim is. So I've always wanted to start a business. It's just like a dream of mine. And I don't know if we want to talk a little bit about my background, but we can. Yeah. But I grew up in New York, just not the best upbringing, but but I managed to.
You
stay
got
at a-
street. You can say it. You got street cred.
Yeah, exactly. I went to
What were you
the
saying
to the
yesterday?
University of Hard Knocks, and I got 3
Yeah.
birth certificates.
I love it.
That counts.
Yeah, that counts. Right. So, but I stayed out of trouble. I've like never done anything. I've my clean license, clean record now.
Yeah.
Coming out of New York, Brooklyn, New York. But I always had dreams, and I've always set my goals. And one of my goals was, to get out of New York, and I did. And then my goal was, buy a house, and I did. And then I was like, I want to have a career, and I think I've done that. And then I was like, I want to have a business. Like that's just like one of my goals. And I'm like, what am I gonna do? Like, what's this business gonna be? Right? Because everyone's telling me, oh yeah, you can do event planning, because that's right. I do a lot of that. You can have like some type of organization that helps, I don't know, set stuff up. But I wanted more than that. I wanted to have like a real business. And when Jim and I talked, I was like, wow, we can really like do something. I can be, the face of the company. I can go out there, do what I have to do, and Jim can do it all.
Still the technical part.
Well, yeah, so a couple like 3.5 years ago, I started, I started my own business, and I just a solo practitioner, consultant, working with owners, commissioning, owners rep, that sort of thing. And I have enough of a reputation within the industry that I haven't made a sales call yet, and I'm booked solid. And then so when Lily and I started talking, I was like, well, she knows everybody, so we're going to be busy as hell. We definitely need to build a team.
Yeah, and if you're going to scale, you need a partner. Yeah.
And so
Right.
we started chatting and talking about the industry, and an ongoing challenge that the industry has is the workforce. People coming into the industry, and I've seen, in my experience, there's a lot of people in the industry that are fine, but they're not next level. And we started talking about how can we get more people into the industry and then get them set so that they can really bring it to the next level.
Yeah.
And so that's what we started.
Yeah. So maybe Lillian
Yeah.
talk, because when we talked earlier about workforce, you guys have some really creative ideas about how you actually want to build that out.
Right. So part of the whole, technical portion, well, my passion is bringing up the next generation, and that's what I've been preaching, and that's like my big thing. And I'm like, before I go, I want to make sure that we have a good pool of new generation, because we're all getting, gray haired, and so we want to bring new talent, right? And that's a big conversation nowadays.
And
right?
transfer that knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? And that was one of the things when we started talking about what kind of business. It started out with training. How do we get people trained? And then you go through your due diligence, and you're like, yeah, I don't know if I can build a full business with training. I wish we could, but it's just then you don't really make money.
And one of the things that that's near and dear to my heart is the hands-on aspect of training. And it's a challenge because data centers, once they're in service, people don't like to mess with them.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of impact if something goes wrong. And we started thinking of our experience with the commissioning business that we both worked at. Well, you're testing the equipment, and putting it through its paces. That's a perfect training environment.
Right.
So that's kind of where we started to steer the
Right.
plan.
So we'll have the training aspect of it, and then we'll have the commissioning. So having the students, apprentices, or whatever we want to call them, come in and train them on hands-on. We'll have some training prior to them going to the job site. But that hands-on training, that is so hard to get because it's not a thing, right? That's the best way to get someone into the industry.
I love it because you're scaling your company at the same time. You're creating opportunities and we've talked about this. This is something, I don't know if you can tell, but Lillian's pretty passionate about reaching into the community. And we are both very passionate about grabbing the students that aren't really thinking about college and either because of financial reasons or they just haven't had the guidance either from their families or even they're not being identified in the educational system. So for us to be able to come in and say, hey, we're going to go into the schools, we're going to pull you out of the classrooms, we see you, and we're going to give you some opportunities.
And for someone who's come through the education route, I've watched it so many times where, you have these folks who they think college is the only way because that's what they were told their whole life. If you want, a good job and a good pay, you have to go to college. And then they get into college they don't really know what they want to do. They flounder
Exactly.
around.
Yeah.
They change their majors several times. And then what happens? They end up dropping out. And all they have is no degree, a lot of debt, and no job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And the reality is if we're just promoting and letting them know that you have other options. And I love that not only are you teaching the next generation, but you're creating continuous improvement. Right. And I think that's just beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I want to start a little bit into the technical side of how you're building your business and your plans there. You brought up something because I don't know a lot about commissioning. I know just enough, but you brought up a concept around operationally directed design. So maybe you can just share with the listeners about what that actually translates. We don't want to give away all your secrets, Jim, as you build this business.
There's no secrets.
But yeah.
So again, like, my background's education, and, also my father was a engineer, and he worked in building operations. And my grandfather was an engineer, so it's like a family tradition. But, I've been in buildings and operated buildings. And so I always approach any project I'm involved in from that perspective of looking out for the person that's going to have to run and maintain the building. And it doesn't get a lot of, it's not on the forefront of a lot of people's minds in the project delivery process as far as design engineers, even some of the owners. And there's a lot of simple things that can be done during design to make it easier for the life of the building. And so I wanted to make that a more formal, structured approach. And so, we were kicking it around and we came up with the operational directed design, or, ODD.
Yeah.
And
we are a lot of odd misfits in this industry. I don't know if anybody knows that, but yeah.
So, we want to formalize that and have that as kind of an outreach to the industry to say, like, listen, think a little differently about how you design things to make it easier to operate and maintain. And, because in typical engineer, when they're labeling equipment, they'll just go, valves, valve 1, valve 2, you're up to valve 400. And when you're writing a operating procedure, now you got to remember, like, all right, so unit 15 is valves 305, 304, and 306. Or if we did a little more structure to it and said unit 15-1, unit 15-2, and then you can write one procedure and just change the 15 number and not the 1, 2, and 3. So it's not earth-shattering things. It's just simple things.
Thinking
but if
ahead.
you think about it,
This is really good because if there's any listeners that are low voltage installers, this stuff applies across the industry in different ways. Yes.
Yeah.
I like it.
And it's also your differentiator, right? I mean, this is how you approach things and address the pain points that you're seeing in commissioning head on. Is this approach. Now, how is this approach different, and it allows you to solve some of those pain points?
well, like a lot of the work, especially recently, I've been doing with my clients is during design. We just had a workshop. One of our clients is building a new facility, and it's to replace a facility they're going to retire. And the operations team from the facility that's going to retire is going to be moving over to the other facility. So the design's kind of in the can, but it's still early days. And so we had a presentation to that operations team on the design concepts and some of the things we incorporated into the design to make their lives easier. Like on this project, there's a lot of equipment on the roof. And the initial design, they basically were going to put a 5 by 7 foot hatch so that if you had to bring a motor or a new compressor up to the roof, like you had to hoist it through the hatch. And I'm like, no, you need a bigger opening, or better yet, let's put a penthouse up and have like a hoistway. And then the client went one step better, and they actually put an elevator in that goes up to the roof. So, but just because they had so much equipment on the roof and thinking 20 years out, like at some point this equipment's going to fail. We're going to have to replace it. And rather than bring it in a crane to hoist stuff up, they can use this freight elevator to get stuff to the roof and do their work.
I love that. I think that's designing for the future. I think it's sustainable, and it sounds like it's a lot safer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So how early should we be bringing in commissioning into the conversation?
I mean, it should be very early on, like when you're getting your design professionals on board. You should, and it's tough because a lot of clients, they're like struggle with, well, if we get them involved this early and the design's not really formulated, how do we get a price from the commissioning agent? at this stage because they don't know how much equipment's going to be involved. And a lot of the actual commissioning work during construction is based on the equipment counts and things like that. But what you can do is you can break it up into two phases. Like you can hire a commissioning agent just for design support and then either keep them or go back out to bid for the construction phase.
Now, exactly. And I've seen firsthand when you don't bring in those conversations in early and you get to the point of commissioning, we're wondering why we're not able to hand it off so smoothly, why we're suddenly getting all of these change orders that, well, now we're trying to commission and we're trying to close this off and and get op ready and hand it over and fire it up. And we can't because now it's not meeting certain standards that the commissioning requires. So if we can get in front of that, we're really reducing a lot of our risk. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And saving quite a bit of pain and money in the long run.
Yeah.
Now, how important is it to track some of the data around, those handoffs right there? Do you think that there would be any benefit to tracking the data that happens in lessons learned? Or is that something you all do when in-house, where you're just tracking some of those lessons learned is really when I say data, I mean lessons learned. So that you create that continuous improvement on the operations side.
Yeah. Like we definitely, like I always review the issues logs on projects to see like how could we have identified this issue earlier,
right,
and prevented it from becoming an issue at some point, and kind of feed that back into the process. And then a lot of times having commissioning agents involved earlier in the project and design, a lot of design professionals think in static states, I call them, like it's at full load, it's at this, it's in like, but nobody thinks about the systems, how they transition from state A to state B. Like, the chiller's got to start, it's got to do this, and the new, the transitions between different events and within the system and the operations. Again, some engineers do a great job, but most think just like, okay, we're designing to 1,000 tons of cooling, and the system runs at 1,000 tons of cooling. But in reality, for the bulk of the time, it's operating at much less than that. And how does the system handle that and transition from one state to another? And a lot of the commissioning agents, because we have to test these events and confirm that they operate properly, we give it a lot more thought. Because we think, when we see the design, we're thinking, well, how do I test that? What's it going to take to get from this state to that state, and what load banks do I need, and all that other stuff. And, it can influence the design and make it, typically what happens if it's not addressed during design, during construction, your controls people and the rest of the team are figuring it out on the fly. And it usually works out, but sometimes it's suboptimal.
Well, sometimes I start to think about, partnership and repeatability. Right. And all those lessons that you're learning and trying to get ahead, and how important are those partnerships? And I know Mara and I, we've talked a lot about, the importance of partnership. You did a great presentation on what it means to be a partner at Data Center World and bringing in partners early, and having those conversations and knowing what that looks like. How does that help with, rather than just rebidding it out there just for the competitiveness? If you're bringing in that partnership and you're learning from that learning curve is gone, we understand that client, we understand your commissioning, talk about how that plays a role.
Well, the experience of working with a team that is being carried from one project to another, especially for, clients that have programs where they're building similar projects over and over again. Mm-hmm. There's huge benefit to that. And because you get to know what the other people need and what problems you found in the past. Everybody understands and has a shared experience. And I was thinking about the Richard Branson, the Virgin Airlines guy. He's quoted as saying, like, what if we train our people and they leave? And he was like, what if you don't and they stay? Wow. Yeah. Like you paid for that knowledge and that education of your team. Mm-hmm. And then by going out and rebidding and coming and bringing somebody else in, you've just taken all that investment in education and thrown it out the window.
Right. So what you're saying is the owners really, they win when the knowledge is retained.
Yeah. And again, if it's a partnership and, that the contractors and all the team members come as a partner and, are fair. Like, they don't try to gouge because they know they're getting the work, and that's when, owners are smart,
they're definitely getting smarter, and that's something that we have to show up and be ready to take them to that next level,
Yeah.
And you even mentioned it, just thinking forward, from a design, not for today, but for the future. And I thought that was a really good point. Now, when it comes back to leadership and that education and that continuous improvement and all those lessons that you're learning, I mean, that you just said you fold that back into everything. Talk about that a little bit, Lillian, on how we're training some of the new folks who are coming in. How are you taking that and creating those learning environments? And then are you creating a path and here you're training them up, but are you creating a future of they know where they're going to go? There's a path for them so you can keep them.
So
how are you showing up as a leader on that?
So right now, what we're thinking, our business plan right now is to take these folks, right, these apprentices, and hopefully have them transition from commissioning from the beginning, from learning, from design review, from doing all the MOPs, SOPs, going through the whole project, and then actually giving the owner, the end user, the opportunity to hire them to be able to become an operator.
They'll know that building really well at the end of the project.
That is incredible. What another great reason to partner with you, because that's a differentiator in itself. Talk about retained knowledge and the learnings that came from that, and the why we made decisions and why it's designed this way and why it was designed for the future and what things were put in place. Wow, that's just
especially
a beautiful
for
path.
New technology, because we are all kind of learning liquid cooling together. We're learning all this together, so everyone's going to need to know how all this works, not just from an installation and commissioning, but maintenance and day two.
Yeah, for sure.
So why is today's commissioning not ready for what's coming?
Well, I mean, like liquid cooling as an example, I think the challenge is going to be how to test those systems, because the typical load bank approach would they'll bring in resistive load banks that basically heat up the air, and then you're using that to load the electrical system, and the heat loads the HVAC system and cooling systems. With the liquid cooling, we need liquid cooled load banks, which they have, and they exist. They're just not very common these days.
And expensive.
And then, like with some of the liquid cooling technology, like the immersion cooling and the two-phase refrigeration type systems, it's getting those load banks that will connect to those systems so that we can test them properly. Nobody's really gone there yet. I mean, I think the liquid cooling presents a huge opportunity from an energy efficiency perspective, because you can use much warmer water to cool that equipment, so you can eliminate chillers, which is a huge, capital expense.
Yes.
You just need the cooling towers and the way to get the heat out of the building. And you can do that. It's, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, as opposed to trying to do it with 55 or 60 degree Fahrenheit water. So there's a huge capital savings there, and then energy efficiency savings. It's coming, and I think it's the right direction. And, it's kind of funny that, we're going back to the 60s, back when all the computers were water cooled. So, but I embrace that. And then, the shift to GPU and AI type computing presents a lot of different challenges with how those systems use power. They're very choppy. They don't maintain a constant load electrically. So they're very up and down, which is causing a lot of the players in the industry to have challenges, because the equipment's not set up for that. And I don't know if it can be set up for that. The swings there that I have a friend that works at one of the cloud guys that are focused on AI. And, we were having a conversation. He goes, yeah, it goes 90% to 20%, like 3 times within a minute. And, the equipment can't do that, so they're having really big challenges. So I'm curious to see how we can get past that, because right now there's nothing out there that can really handle it. And, other than oversizing everything, which, again, is capital intensive. And, I'm hoping that the GPU manufacturers and the people that program these things figure out a way to have them be a little more stable load wise, because on the infrastructure side of things, it's going to be a struggle.
I think
Wow.
we're going to have to bring him back with some other guests and talk
I know.
through this. Yeah, this is.
See, this is why
I
he's
feel
my
like this is
partner.
going to be a debate. This is going to be a little lovely debate. Like, how do we solve this problem? And,
Yeah.
because it's one
I
where
love
we
the
got to get
fact we
around.
might have to call this one Back to the Future because we go into the future to talk about future, but then we have to go back to the future and
Yeah.
things.
So we've
Yeah.
been back. Yeah, we got to go to the future and check out how it gets solved and then come back and report.
Yeah.
So we always end our episode with an audacious question. And so the audacious question from our viewers and our listeners, they want to know the number of data center outages have hung around 70 to 80% in the last few years, and they're typically contributed to human error. So what do you think we can do about it?
Well, the concept of operational directed design kind of leads to that a little bit. Human error, the systems have gotten some aspects have gotten simpler, but they've also gotten much larger scale. So they become very complicated. And again, anybody who's been in a data center, especially a large scale data center, you go from one electrical room to the next, they look identical. And so when you're doing switching operations or any kind of operations, sometimes you got to really think about where you are. Are you in the right room?
Right.
Wow.
And so like the concept, from total quality management, Poka-Yoke, which is mistake proofing, things like I have a client that paints the rooms, like all the A rooms, all the A power supplies are painted blue and all the B power supplies are painted green. Just so as you walk into the room, you mentally
Visually.
go, okay, I'm in an A power side.
Yep.
And then clear labeling of the equipment so that when you're doing a switching procedure or trying to manipulate the system into a certain state, that it's more difficult to do the wrong switch, because that's what happens is, like we were doing a project and it was during commissioning. We were doing a pull the plug, the final big test, and the two electricians were out in the yard at the 26 kV gear getting ready to open the switches, and the commissioning agent was like, all right, on 3, 1, 2, 3, and one guy opened the switch and the other guy turned the pistol grip the wrong way.
Oh.
It was already close, and nothing happened. And so every side had a chuckle, and then the one guy's like, no, unclosed.
Unclosed.
But
That's
it's a simple mistake,
Mm-hmm.
so these things happen and you'll never eliminate it completely.
Mhm.
But, simple designs that are clearly labeled and help the operator or the people in these facilities build a simple mental model to keep things straight in their head. Because you can definitely make things too complicated. I've been on some projects where they get really deep into the complication, and it's prone to error, because you leave one switch in the wrong position, it can take the whole thing down.
Yeah. Wow.
We're starting to see a lot more LMS tools, learning tools, automated tools built in, especially with the new apprenticeships and workforce development. Like, we can't take all that for granted, right?
No.
Yeah.
I think, though, today the big takeaways are commissioning needs to start early.
Yeah.
Operational directed design is a game changer.
Okay. I hope so.
Apprenticeship programs are strategic, which I just love what you're playing out. It's really beautiful. Strong partnerships beat low bids,
I like it.
and commissioning reduces risk across the entire life cycle. So I think with all of that, thank you all for coming and joining us
Well,
today
thank you
and
for
sharing
having
your
us.
knowledge.
Yeah, and congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we're here to celebrate your
Your-
success, and thank you for sharing back with the rest of the industry what you're building, and we're excited to see. Hopefully, we'll be able to have you back
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
and take a little bit deeper dive into some of the other topics that we just kind of hit on. But
Thank you for having us. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you. Bye.